I hope that you're well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 4 English lesson on sensory detail. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 4. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of sensory details. All right, so our chapter is sensory details. Our subject is English language arts, grade 4. And the lesson that we are focusing on today under the chapter of sensory details is to identify sensory details. So we are going to identify sensory details, and sensory details, right, is to do with our senses. So it's basically to do with our senses, and it gives details about our senses, right? All right. So when it comes to sensory details, it says that writers, oopsie, it says that writers, they use sensory details So writers, they use sensory details, and that is to make stories as well as scenes easier for the reader to imagine. It's like watching a play, right? You're going to have to, let's say, use your senses to imagine what is going on in the play, right? So when it comes to imagining, right, it says sensory details, it makes the reader to imagine a particular sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch. So sometimes either in a play or in something, right? Make up stories even. The narrator would be the one that basically narrates the story, and he or she will then tell the story as to what is happening, right? They will give us details. So what you need to do is you're going to have to try and imagine. You're going to have to try and paint a picture in your head. You're going to try to, let's say, put the face to whatever that the narrator says. You need to try and even imagine sometimes a sound that, that, for example, it will make when you, based on what the narrator says. Let's say the narrator also says that, oh, when the door opened. So now you need to try and imagine the door opening. The writer says that it made a creaking sound or squeaking sound. Now you need to try to remember, not even remember, you're going to try to imagine in your mind, for example, the door opening and making a squeaky or creaky sound. Right? So when it comes to our sensory details, we have five senses. So we have five senses. We have sight, and sight is, of course, seeing, right? So we're going to the first one first, which is sight, right? And sight, it says John's face glowed from the light of the fire. So try to imagine sitting outside on a bonfire, right? And you're looking over to John and you see that John's face is glowing from the light of the fire, right? So that means you can see that happening, right? That is sight. You are seeing that happening. The glow from the light of the fire that is on John's face. It's a sight, it's what you can see. Then we have sound, right? Sound is something that we can hear, right? So, sound, it says, in the morning, Samantha awoke to the chirping of birds outside her window. So, if you haven't seen it, you also haven't heard it, but now you're going to have to try and imagine based on the details that he's giving. You need to try and imagine whatever he's trying to say. You need to try and imagine the birds chirping, right? Outside your window. All right, so we say that is sound, something that you hear. Try to imagine sound. Try to imagine what people is trying to say to you, and even sometimes try to imagine voices, right? It's like listening to my voice, but you don't see me, and without even having to introduce myself, you're like, oh, okay, that is actually Miss Nadine, right? Because by now you have already, let's say, saved my voice or the tone of my voice, let's say within your either the chats or Google or I don't know, right? Then we have smell. Smell. I caught a whiff of freshly baked bread as I passed by the bakery. All right, so we said when it comes to smell, right? Smell is also, let's say, a specific scent that will also, let's say, remind you of someone, or you will always be remembered by that specific person. And when it comes to smell, it says, I caught a whiff of freshly baked bread as I passed by the bakery. All right. And remember, people, your smell, right? Somebody's smell can be remembered based on how they smell, either can be a nice smell or a not so nice smell, right? And then sometimes you might not remember somebody for the lovely cookies that was baked, but because of the perfume, the way the room smells or house smells, right? All right. And then we have taste. Then we have taste. And it says, the sharply sour apple made Mary's mouth pucker. All right, so we said that we have um smell. Now we have taste, right? And it says the sharply sour apple made Mary's mouth pucker. Sometimes somebody can be remembered based on the food that they have tasted, right? So if you maybe cooked somebody pasta, right, or somebody cooked you pasta and it was divine, it was very nice, then next time when you have pasta again, you would want this specific person to make you that pasta, right? Because of the taste. So we remember taste. Remember also flavors, right? Because that is how you program your head to lock in that. For example, it's almost like you're storing it in one, like we would call it, you store it in a memory box, right? And the memory box is in your, it's in our mind, it's our brains. Then we have touch, right? Touch can be physical, right? It says Ted was uncomfortable in his scratchy wool sweater. All right. So this is basically our sensory details, right? And we see that sensory details is when we have our five senses, and our five senses is sight, what you can see, it is sounds, it's what you can hear, it is smell, something that you can smell with your nose, something that you can taste, whether it is a beverage, whether it is something hard, something liquidy, right? Something that you can taste. I'm not sure if I said something that you can smell with your nose, can be a nice smell or not so nice smell. And then also touch. All right. So once again, right, we said sensory details. Sensory details is to do with the details that we get based on our senses, right? That is sensory details. And also, when they say writers use sensory details to make stories or scenes easier for the reader to imagine, sometimes what they also do is they will give us a paragraph, right? And we're going to have to identify what type of sensory detail is that. All right. And we said a sensory detail or the sensory details, it makes the reader imagine, right? A particular sight, a sound, a smell, taste, or touch. So imagine. All right. Are you asking me what was a pun, or you asking me what is a pun? Or is that for someone else? All right. All right, so before we go on to aplusstudents.ca, you will see that when we go now to our tutorial of aplusstudents.ca, the writer gives you a paragraph, right? And within the paragraph, he is trying to explain something. It is one of the senses that we are going to have to use. It is either something that we can see, which is sight, something that we can hear, which is sound, something that we can smell, something that we can taste, or the writer is going to describe something that we can touch, right? And that is basically how it is with a paragraph, where um all right. So that is what I'm saying. So I'm saying that when we now go to aplusstudents.ca, then we will basically find paragraphs, and we're going to have to either identify if the paragraph is describing something sight, something that we can hear, which is sound, something smell, taste, or touch. And that is sensory details, right? It's because they're giving details within a paragraph, and you're going to have to either say which one of these scenery or sensory details is being described or is being used, right? All right, so now we're going to aplusstudents.ca. All right, so we are doing our tutorial lesson still on aplusstudents.ca. So we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca, and then we're going to grade 4 and sensory details. Mhm. Right? All right, so our chapter is once again sensory details. And the lesson that we are focusing on is to identify sensory details. So now we are going into this lesson, and we are going to identify the sensory details, keeping in mind the five senses that we have, which is the five senses, which is sight, which is touch, ear, smell, right? I think and sight. I'm not sure if I say did I say sight? Sight, smell, hearing, which is a sounds, touching, right? That is our five senses. So now we're going into our sensory details. All right, so now as you can see, we have it's like paragraphs that is being given to us, right? Um, so we are then gonna have to say, um, we're gonna have to describe or select the sentence with the details that either describe smelling, tasting, touching, or whichever sensory detail that it describes in there, right? If we look at the first one, if we look at the first one, it says we need to select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes smell. All right, so I'm first going to read it, right? It says, last night, a big storm blew in and dumped several inches of rain on the city. This morning, the earthy scent of worms blew in through Luther's open window. Luther knew that it would be a good morning to go fishing. He headed outdoors with a container to catch some worms for bait. When he had enough, he grabbed his tackle box and fishing pole and he headed to the lake. We are now going to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes smell within that sentence. The sentence that describes smell. So it says once again, I'm going to read it again, right? And then we will do it together. It says last night a big storm blew in and dumped several inches of rain on the city. This morning the earthy scent of worms blew in through Luther's window. Luther knew that it would be a good morning to go catch fish or to go fishing. He headed outdoors with a container to catch some earthy bait or to fish some to catch some worms for bait. When he had enough, he grabbed his tackle box and fishing pole and he headed to the lake. So if we look at that paragraph, right, and we need to select the sensory details that describe smell. All right, so if we were to describe the sensory detail, which is smell, within this paragraph, then we can say, I'm going to underline it. It says, this morning, the earthy scent, so scent, something that you can smell, the earthy scent of worms blew in through Luther's open window. So our that is our sensory detail that is being described. Smell is being described, right? Because I said it was a storm the night before, and usually after a storm, you still smell. Let's say you basically get the scent of they call it earth. Some people would say it's earth. It's more like just the sand and the grass, and it actually has a very nice smell, right? So that is what you will get. You will get this the earthy scent of worms blew in through Luther's open window. All right. So this morning, the earthy scent of worms blew in through Luther's open windows, and that describes the smell. All right, let's go to the second one. They say that we need to select the sentence with sensory details that describes a taste, right? It says during lunch yesterday, Stacy passed Jeff a note. When Matt tried to grab it, Jeff quickly stuck the note in his mouth and chewed it. Poor Jeff. The flavor of sour cardboard coated his tongue, but Stacy was happy that Jeff had acted quickly. The note was private. It was just too bad Jeff never had a chance to read what I said. So we need to describe taste, right? So we're going to have to say which sentence within this paragraph basically describes or gives us the details of taste. And if we read it again, it says during lunch yesterday, Stacy passed Jeff a note. When Matt tried to grab it, Jeff quickly stuck the note in his mouth and chewed. The flavor of sour cardboard coated his tongue, but Stacy was happy that Jeff had acted quickly. That note was private. It is too bad. Jeff never had a chance to read what I said. All right, and if we select the sensory detail that describes taste, right? That describes taste before I go on to the sensory detail. It says that a letter was sent to Jeff, right? And then someone else came and wanted to grab the letter. So Jeff quickly put the letter in his mouth, right? Which means that what is being eaten, it is a piece of paper, right? That is being eaten. All right. So which means that when he put the card, not even the cardwood, when he put the papers in his mouth, right? There's basically other tastes that he tasted. So when it comes to describing taste, something that we can taste is, it says the flavor of sour cardboard coated his mouth. They are describing. All right. So this is basically how writers try to, let's say, they try to show either paragraphs or in a written form, then they would basically describe either one of the senses or the sensory details, right? All right, let's do this last one. It says, we need to select a sentence with sensory details that describe how something feels to the touch. How something feels to the touch, right? It says Jenny dropped her book bag to the ground and shook her head. She hated carrying around all those hard, heavy books every day. So Jenny formed a plan. She was going to talk to Mr. Walton at school the next day. She was going to tell him that she was getting too much homework and that he should start giving her less. If that didn't work, Jenny would have to start bringing a wheelbarrow to school. All right. So if we look at this paragraph, right, they want us to select The sensory with details that describe how something feels to the touch. And if we look at the sentence, it says it says Jenny dropped her book bag to the ground and shook her head. Yeah, if we look at the sentence, she hated carrying around all those hard, heavy books every day, right? That sentence alone, right? It describes how something feels to the touch, right? Meaning her bag is heavy, there's a lot of books, right? So how does she feel? She feels she's angry, right? She's frustrated because now she's carrying around all those hard, heavy books every single day, right? All right. So now we're going on to A plus students. We're going to the test, sorry, and we are going to describe. We're going to describe the sensory details. We're going to identify sensory details within a paragraph. All right, so now we're going to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes a taste. So we're going to have to describe a taste. It says Mary and Simon went sailing on Mary's boat last week. So we're going to have to select the sentence with the sensory detail that describes a taste, right? It says Mary and Simon went sailing on Mary's boat last week. Mary was the captain, so she steered. Simon was in charge of the boat's army linen and ropes. His first duty was to undo a knotted line before they set sail. Simon used his mouth to help loosen the knot. The flavor of the bitter, oily old ropes almost made him sick. Next time Simon thought he'd like to be the captain. So we're going to have to now select the sentence with a sensory detail that describes taste. All right, and if we are going to select the sensory detail that describes taste, and then we're going to choose yes, yes. So it is the second option, which is the flavor of the bitter, oily, old ropes almost made him sick, meaning that he did not like the taste, right? He did not like the taste. And it's not like he did it on purpose, right? So now, yeah, he's describing the details of the taste. Says it's bitter, it's oily, right? All right, but it describes taste. All right, so well done. Let's go to the second one. The second one says we need to select the sentence with sensory details that describes taste also. Yes, well done. Well done. All right. So it says during lunch yesterday, Wendy passed Brett a note. When Lamar tried to grab it, Brett quickly stuck the note in his mouth and chewed. Poor Brit, the flavor of sour cardboard coated his tongue. But Wendy, as happy, was happy that Brit had acted quickly. That note was private. It was too bad. Brit never had a chance to read what it said. So we need to describe the taste. Is it the first option, which says the flavor of sour cardboard coated with his tongue, or the second option, which says, but Wendy was happy that Brit had acted quickly? We need to describe the. All right. So we need to select the sensory details that describes taste. All right. And if we select our sensory detail that describe taste, yes, then we can say the flavor of sour cardboard coated his tongue. He's not actually describing what he had tasted. All right. So we see that the flavor of sour cardboard coated his tongue, meaning he did not like it. He did not enjoy it. So well done. Well done to all of you guys who got that right. We need to now describe a sound. We need to describe a sound. It says Min was relieved to hear the car door slam out front. So Min was relieved to hear the car door slam out front. Mr. and Mrs. Morris must be back. Finally, this endless day of taking care of little Alice at Kevin Morris was over. It was the hardest work Min had ever done. She had read them The Cat in the Hat at least 80 times. They had played the same silly board game even more times than that. She couldn't wait to get home and take a bath. So now we need to say which sensory detail or which sentence describes sound. Sound. So we need to select the sound or describe the sound. Is the first one, which is Min was relieved to hear the car door slam out front. Or was it Mr. and Mrs. Morrison must be back? Which one is correct? All right. So we need to describe sound. Guys, we are finishing 45. All right. So we can say that Min was relieved to hear the car door slam out front. Because remember, if a car door slams, that is basically something that you can hear, right? So yes, well done. The car door slammed. So well done. That describes sound, right? So it's being described as in what they can hear. All right. So we're going to select the sentence with sensory detail that describes smell, right? This is now the last one. Quan wondered what had happened now. Daisy, his cat, came running toward him, her tail sticking up the air. As soon as she got close enough, Daisy leaped onto Quan. Daisy rubbed her head and neck onto Quan's jeans and shirt. The sour odor that filled the room answered Quan's question. His cat had run into a skunk and now they're both needing a bath, right? So now we need to say which details or describes a smell. We need to say, is it the sour odor that filled the room, answered Kwan's question, or that his cat had run into a skunk? All right, and if we basically give the sensory details about smell, right, then we will go to the first one. Guys, remember all of you can say the same question, the same answer, right? So the sour odor, this is now describing smell. The sour odor that filled the room answered Kwan's question, right? The cat was stinking. All right, so that is basically it for sensory details. We said that with sensory details, it is basically right this describing in detail um, about the senses, right? In it's either when they are writing in paragraphs, right? So we mentioned the five sensory details or the five senses, and in paragraphs, right? The sensory details, different sensory details can be described, and we will be able to identify if it is smell, if it's taste, if it's sight, if it is touching, and I don't know what what was the last one? The fifth one, sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, right? So then we basically had to identify which of the sensory details it was. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on sensory details. Thank you very much, Good Force, for joining the class. You must have an amazing weekend. Till next time, goodbye. I think we do have class on Monday. Are you guys still on holiday? But I do think we have class on Monday.